did as it unfolded. So in the mid-19th century, Mexico lost more than half of its national territory to the United States. It was invaded by foreign countries several times. There was a tension between power in the center of Mexico, Mexico City, and different regions of Mexico. This is the home of a local politician in Guanajuato who also benefited from the wealth of the mines. As I mentioned, the world market had paid very well for raw materials. So Mexico developed sugar. So in the area of Cuernavaca, if anybody's been to Cuernavaca, Morelos, sugar production expanded significantly. People invested in the land. They took advantage of the laws, the land laws that I mentioned. They took advantage of the development of the railroads that I mentioned, and expanded the agricultural production of sugar. And this is the place where Emiliano Zapata comes from, and we'll talk about him later. So another product that really took off was strawberries. So this is from 1901, where strawberries ripen every day of the year. So all of these crops that didn't grow in very many places in the United States were being produced more and more in Mexico and exported to places like the United States. And in fact, during the Porfiriato, there was a significant shift in Mexico's relationship to the world economy, in that if France and Britain had been the primary trading partners in the mid-19th century, both in terms of imports and exports, by the Porfiriato, the United States had far surpassed those countries and became the #1 partner with Mexico in terms of imports and exports. And the two countries became very closely tied in terms of their economics during this time, and it's a relationship that continues to exist today. Not all parts of development is uneven. Not all parts of the economy developed. This is an example of people gathering fuel and pulque. And these goods were sold in markets. Many goods were exported, as I mentioned. A lot of them were sold in local markets. This is a local pottery market. Industrialization took off as well during this period. So this is from the Casasola collection of workers in a shoe factory. And so the economy took off during this period. International trade increased fourfold. The production of silver, gold, and copper especially took off. Mexico became the 3rd largest producer of oil by 1911. And there was, as I mentioned, this increase in agricultural production. So what then you had were a lot of changes in social relations. So more factories, so more people moving into, well, let me start actually in the countryside. With the expansion of agriculture, people being pushed off the land, their own land that they owned and cultivated for their own use, became either agricultural workers, so people paid to work on a hacienda, paid to cut sugar, paid to collect coffee, or they migrated out of rural areas, either to Mexico City, where industrialization was expanding and many of them found jobs, or to the United States. So one of the early ways of migration to Utah, for example, was during the Mexican Revolution. Okay, so here are just a couple of examples of the kinds of industrialization that was going on. Carpet factories near Orizaba. This actually is a manufactory in Mexico City that had existed since the colonial period. These women are rolling cigars and cigarettes. So industrialization brought in a lot of men, but it also brought in a lot of women as well. And in fact, Mexico City had the highest percentage of women in the country because of the industries that had developed there. In Monterrey, in the north, you had steel and beer and glass, and those were mostly industries dominated by men. In Mexico City, there was a lot of textiles, seamstresses, people rolling cigars and such. Glass blowing factory. A lot of people also found what would become white-collar jobs. Maybe middle class, maybe not middle class, right? So there's this growth in middle class occupations as well. This picture is from 1914, from after the revolution, but it's a good one from the Casasola of women working as waitresses in Sanborn's coffee shop. This is a typing competition, and I should give a shout out to my mother. She's the reason why I'm writing a history of secretaries, and she's here with us tonight. Pharmacy expanded, was an important occupation for women. And then there were people who moved to the cities and did not find jobs in factories and who sold their wares and their services on the streets. The musicians. In order for this economic development to occur, Diaz had to strengthen the country in terms of centralizing political control, and I'm not going to go into that too much right now, but also in terms of strengthening the military. So these are the rural police. But the Mexican government invested heavily in the army and in the rural police. And the rural police played a role in terms of ceremonies and public presence. They also, so this is an exhibit by C.D. Waite, who took a lot of photographs in Mexico. So there's a lot of sort of the ceremony of government became very important during this period. And unfortunately, quelling those people who didn't want their lands taken away so that the agricultural production could expand. On the upside of modernization, this is a period, especially the 1880s, 1890s, and the turn of the century, when there's an incredible amount of beautification of the city, of urban development, of expansion of the arts. And because of the money that was coming in, the government was able to build some of the sort of landmarks that we still know today. Watching my time, sorry. Okay. So this is the beginning of the building of Bellas Artes, the Opera House, Mexico City. Prisons, also an important part of modernization. This kind of development didn't happen just in Mexico City, it happened in the different states as well. So this is Nayarit, a new railroad station. And again, you have different types of urban development going on. This is a street corner where you have vendors who put down their wares for a while next to a pulqueria. So there's a lot of urban development that looked very different. Education is something that expanded hugely during this period, especially the 1880s, 1890s again. So the federal and state budgets that were given to education during the Porfiriato more than doubled. Literacy rates went from less than 15% to more than 20%. And most of that education was in urban areas. So it's a very urban phenomenon. This is a picture of the Portales de Santo Domingo in Mexico City. The woman on your left is a public scribe. So many of the people who got left out of that educational expansion, they had to submit a petition or go get a license or send a letter to somebody in the provinces, would go to a scribe. 5 minutes, okay? More schools. Education was a huge opportunity for women. I'm going to skip past this because... Okay, so then several events occurred that made people begin to see a lot of the inequities of this modernization. There was a strike in Rio Blanco, which was a textile factory in 1907. Seamstresses went on strike in Mexico City. Lots of women went on strike as well. This is from actually later in the revolution. Let's see, okay. Does anybody know who this is? Pancho Villa. I think it's an image of him that we don't usually see, so I thought I would include it. So to understand the revolution then, given that context of the Porfiriato, the revolution brought together several different sectors of people. It brought together elites who had benefited from the development associated with the Porfiriato. So, for example, Francisco Madero, his family did extremely well during the Porfiriato in terms of cotton plantations, banks, Revolution and the Plan de San Luis Potosí. He was someone who was left out of political power, access to political power towards the close of the regime. So that's one group. The other groups would include people like Pancho Villa, who he brought people together, often who were farmers, merchants, people looking for work, and represented people in the northern part. Zapata represented people in south central Mexico, people who, in particular the state of Morelos, who had been pushed off their land, as I talked about earlier. So in 1910, Madero makes a call for revolution. That rebellion failed, but Diaz eventually left the country. Madero was elected. He was subsequently shot. This is really quick, in 2 minutes. And in 1914, Villa and Zapata's forces congregated on Mexico City. They were not, Zapata in particular was not interested in ruling the country from Mexico City. That alliance did not succeed. Okay, I'm going through all this stuff really fast. 1914. So then, in 1917, there's a constitutional convention, and they wrote the Constitution that is in existence today and has some of the main tenets of the Mexican Revolution, which it has to do with labor rights, expansion of the educational system, and in particular, the way that people have access to land. So then what happened with the revolution is that many of the demands of different interests were incorporated into the Constitution. So that is Revolution 101.
This is an image that Frida Kahlo had painted while she was living in Detroit with her husband, Diego Rivera. And I've cut it in half because who cares about the American side of the painting? We want to see the Mexican side. She was actually born in 1907, but she always claimed to have been born in 1910. And that's not from vanity over her age. That's because she felt that her life began with the revolution and not with when she was born to her parents. In this painting, she shows that the sun and the moon are fertilizing the land. You can see a pre-Columbian temple in the background and West Mexican objects that are fertilizing the ground. What we see with the revolution, a good background on what occurred with the revolution. After the revolution was successful, the theory was, the philosophy was, by the government and by the education department, was that the Spanish conquest back in the 16th century was a horrible mistake. That for the first time, the great civilization, the world civilization, was not just conquered, it was murdered. And for that reason, what partly the Mexican Revolution was all about was to restore this idea that we are not foreigners in this land of Mexico. We are indigenous to this land. We are descended from a great and noble civilization, particularly the Aztecs, because that was the best known civilization at the time of the Mexican Revolution at the beginning of the 20th century, but later the Mayas as well. So Frida Kahlo claims that she is of two parts. She has a European side to her, she has an indigenous side to her. And it's the indigenous side that she said that Diego Rivera loved about her. And she developed that more and more in her career. We've already done a little background on the Porfiriatos. We don't have to really review that. This is an image of Porfirio Diaz with his generals and científicos. The científicos were people that he had hired to make a more scientific use of the land. This is one of the reasons why the land got focused in the hands of just a few wealthy landowners. Up to 90% of the commoners in Mexico lost their lands and were forced into debt damage. This is one of the reasons why the Mexican Revolution was so important to the commoner class. Emiliano Zapata, of course, was Artes building being constructed. There it is as it looks today. This is one of the great projects that Porfirio Diaz initiated because he felt that he wanted to drag Mexico into the 20th century, not only in land use, but also in industrialization in his country and also in the arts. And he felt that European arts were more sophisticated and cultured than what was going on in Mexico in those days. So if you look at the outside of this building, this is very little to do with Mexico. This is pure Beaux-Arts French style. The art on the inside is Art Nouveau French. It has very little to do with what is going on in Mexico itself. You rather discount what's going on in Mexico. So there's, so about that again. And there's the famous picture. I think the one down there is in much better condition than my bad copy of the copy of the copy. Okay, so let's get to some of the figures that are influential in the arts in the post-revolutionary period. This is Vasconcelos. And Vasconcelos was the first minister of education after the revolution. And his philosophy was that there have been 4 great ages of man, or there was to be 4 great ages of man. Each was ruled over by a particular race. The Europeans had already had their time, the Chinese had already had their time, and the Africans had already had their time. Now it's time for the Latin Americans. Mexico is going to lead the forefront of a new dawning of an age of Mexican power and influence and art and philosophy and science and everything else. He wanted to foster education to lead to that. As Minister of Public Education in Mexico, there is a building that he wanted to have decorated. So he traveled all over, convinced Diego Rivera, among many others, to come to Mexico City and to decorate the walls of the public education building in Mexico City. Diego Rivera was working with the Cubists in Europe and really had very little to do with the revolution, didn't know much about it. Truth be told, didn't care much about it. He kind of rewrote his own history, saying he was a revolutionary from birth. He wasn't. He much preferred hanging around with Picasso in Paris, in the cafes there. But Vasconcelos took him on a tour of Yucatan Peninsula and other pre-Columbian areas and convinced him that through art, we could create a new dawning in Mexico. So Rivera was assigned a certain number of walls in the Ministry of Education. His paintings were so beautiful. Rivera, if you've seen photographs of him, I'm sure about one, he's a very large man and he has an ego to match. He convinced Vasconcelos that his work was far better than any of the other murals that were working in there, and most of the others had their work whitewashed over so that Diego would have more space. I think the estimate is something like 10 times more than the square footage of the Sistine Chapel is what he painted on the walls of the Ministry of Education. Amazing. So, the other thing that occurred, we'll get back to Rivera in just a second, was that because you are claiming heritage from this rich and glorious past culture before the Spaniards came, they had to dig it up and make it available so that Mexicans could see it and foreign tourists. Manuel Gandhi was the chief architect and chief archaeologist in Mexico at the time, and he took it upon himself to rebuild Teotihuacan, which is the great pyramids outside Mexico City. What you see today is to a great extent the result of his work. And it's still one of the iconic images of what is Mexico, what its heritage is. The only trouble is that there weren't enough stones to completely rebuild it the way that it needs to look. I don't know if you can see that, it's not right in here. You see how the main pyramid of the sun there has a certain angle at the bottom, and then it angles in and goes up that way? It's because he ran out of stone. Originally, it would have been flat on the surfaces, and it would have all been one single angle. So he's not the best of archaeologists. We don't do that anymore. Nevertheless, it's popular, and people buy droves with it. Okay. They sought this building as kind of an in-your-face to Porfirio Diaz. We are going to have Mexican murals decorate the inside of Bellas Artes. We're going to take away as much of the European influence as we possibly can. And we're going to focus on indigenous people. So here you have a flower festival in Mexico City with indigenous people. This would never have been allowed into Bellas Artes in Porfiriato. Another image, on the left you can see the Aztec pre-Columbian object, Coatlicue. Coatlicue is kind of a nature goddess. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can see one of the murals in Bellas Artes that shows the Coatlicue sculpture, but if you look very closely, you can also see the crucified Christ imposed on it. So it's this blending of the modern world with the ancient, the Christian with the pagan, with all of these wonderful interconnections that you have to create what they believe would be the glory of modern Mexico. There's Diego Rivera. I do have a picture of him. So there he is working on the Ministry of Education murals. This is what Rivera had carved into the main entrance into the Ministry of Education. And this is from a poem by an Aztec poet, a Mexica poet, named Nezahualcóyotl. And Nezahualcóyotl wrote, "Neither with a mound of treasures will you assuage your servitude, for treasures are but smoke. Only songs and flowers that cover the earth give praise, for they enrapture the soul." In Aztec theology, flowers and song and poetry were the only things that were eternal. And that's because they are performance. They come from the mouth of the poet or the person's singer, and they hang in the air just briefly, and then they just vanish into eternity. Those are the kind of frail, ephemeral things, like flowers and songs. Those were the most valued things in Aztec society. We don't usually think of Aztecs as sitting around and sniffing flowers and writing poetry, reciting poetry. But they did. That was the highest form of art for them. And they will tell you it was the highest forms of art. The gold, the stone, the jade, all those other kinds of things, those are not eternal whatsoever. It's those things that come into the world and immediately pass back into the other world where the gods and the ancestors are. That's what's permanent. So, I'm not sure that Rivera understood all of that, but what he did understand was that flowers and poetry were the contribution of the ancient society. These were artists. These were people that cared about beauty and cared about bettering their world, is the way that he would have looked at it. Not wealth, not the things that Porfirio Diaz cared about, which was just simply economic in his mind. So he did a lot of these images of flower markets with indigenous people, with this in mind, this harkening back to the ancestors of the modern indigenous people and their value on beauty and on art. This is one of the murals inside the Ministry of Education, and it shows, you can see over the left-hand side, an image of the Mexican god of poetry, or Aztec god of poetry. His name is Xochipilli. And surrounded by people who are appreciating this artistic expression. And again, he's trying to convince people in Mexico that the Aztecs were not a barbarous people that they've been told hundreds of years, ever since the Spanish conquest. These were people of high culture, of higher culture than the Spaniards, certainly a higher culture than Porfirio Diaz. In this image, you can see the image of an indigenous woman holding maize, which is the true wealth of the land, in his opinion. And then over on the left-hand side, you see the church in the guise of a friar and a wealthy landowner and a businessman being struck by lightning from the gods. They're being punished not just by the revolutionaries, they're being punished by the Mexican gods themselves. And they will never return to power. And then you have the alliance of the soldier, the worker, the factory worker, and the peasant farmer uniting to become the new age of Mexican society. Here you have a nice juxtaposition also from the Ministry of Education murals. The left is called the Banquet of Wall Street. Nelson and Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, look like you probably recognize them over on the left-hand side. And they're all eating plates of gold coins, and ticker tapes coming off of the stock ticker. And you contrast with the humble Mexican indigenous people with the bounties of the earth and actually consuming that which makes them stronger, healthier, more vital. So you see this again and again and again. I love this image. This is from the flower festival panel. And here you can see indigenous people by droves coming into Mexico City, bringing in flower, beauty, art, all the rest of it. And in the foreground, you see this one woman. You can probably hear me because I have a way obnoxious loud voice. This woman right here, dressed in a flapper dress, which is copied from the Americans, and she's painted her face white to look Caucasian, and painted her, dyed her hair blonde so that she would, would look like a foreigner. And you see the looks of the indigenous people, especially the one right behind her, kind of looking at her with a mixture of disdain and humor. What are you doing? You look silly. You look foolish. We are the future, not this, because they're fading away in the past. This is a building that Diego Rivera left to posterity, gave to the Mexican people. It is one of the buildings he owned in life. It's the Anahuacalli. Anahuacalli is a museum where he wanted to show Aztec art. He had an amazing collection, something like 5,400, more than 5,400 pieces that he collected in his lifetime. The only trouble is a little bit of rewriting of history because it's all stone. He liked to teach people and show people that Aztecs were proto-Marxists. They were all unified, good workers, and there was no aristocracy, and there was no persecution of the common class by the upper class. Well, that's total bunk. And the Aztecs were one of the most stratified society in history. But he didn't want people to think that, and perhaps he didn't know. But he never showed any gold or jade or fancy stuff. It was always these stone images. So that gets on to, that's the early revolutionary kind of things. But it would be nice to look at, and I was asked to look at a little bit, how this indigenismo, this focus on indigenous culture and art as being the foundation and background of Mexican people as it progresses through time. So this is actually a travel ad that was put out in the 1930s to attract people to come, especially from the United States. People were still a little bit leery of coming to Mexico after the revolution. Pancho was no friend of the border. And this was a means of showing people that there is something wonderful to see, number one, and that it's safe. It has a nice woman there. It doesn't have an Aztec warrior. So there you can see Teotihuacan in the background. And you can see the Temple of the Sun, Pyramid of the Sun, and she's leaning on the Pyramid of Quetzalcoatl, which is also Teotihuacan. This is another wonderful 1930s era ad. Again, just a little bit of a flapper hairstyle. They don't look terribly Mexican, but nevertheless. She's meant to be an indigenous-looking person with a wonderful lipstick and all that. Why she's wearing a Zapotec incensario on her head, I don't know. But again, it's reinforcing that idea of these are indigenous people. Mexicans are not Europeans in the 1920s and 30s and even through today. They are descendants of indigenous people, and they're proud of that cultural heritage. In preparation for the 1968 Olympics, which was held in Mexico City, there were a number of posters and ads that went up to kind of advertise the games, and virtually universally, it was always this Aztec warrior who was running in the games or shotting the foot and all these other kinds of things, oftentimes with a cross in the background to remind them that these are modern people and they're Christians, but they are still Aztec warriors, and that's the powerful part of their background. This is a great image. Here you have oftentimes called the calendar stone. It's actually an altar, but it's for a tire ad. So you see how they've replaced the central part of the altar with a tire, because they were one of the founders of the Olympics, or one of the funders of the Olympics. But yeah, if you spent any time in Mexico, at least up until about 10 or 20 years ago, everybody knew Jesus Santiago. He's the Norman Rockwell of Mexico. He was on book covers, calendars, advertisements, menus, everything. What he did was to, again, extol this pre-Columbian past, especially Aztec past. But his figures are all of them warriors, are always noble and proud and buff, The women were always svelte and beautiful and princesses, and it was just this wonderful recreation of the Golden Age. Because for Mexicans, especially in the 1950s, this was the answer to the horrendous stereotype that you oftentimes see in America and Europe of the lazy Mexican or the greedy Mexican, and other kinds of things. Telguera was not going to put up with that. We have a proud heritage. I'm going to make people understand that. I put up that quote from Nezahualcóyotl, who was one of the great poet kings of the ancient Aztec and Chica. This is Jesus Elguera's version of Nezahualcóyotl in his garden, with lovely maidens spouting poetry at her, holding a flower. I doubt very much Nezahualcóyotl looked like this, but it's kind of cool. Reconstructed. Again, Norman Rockwell doesn't paint the truth, he paints what should be the truth, and that's very much what Elguera did. Or this is even better, lounging around with the Jaguar as they're floating down Xochimilco. It's terrific. It wasn't that way, but shouldn't it have been? And then he has no problem with Columbus, because again, it's this combination of Christianity and ancient things that create the modern Mexico. So here you have Hernan Cortes with Linche, both of them wonderful and beautiful, riding white stallions as long as a bus in to conquer the Aztec Empire and fuse this new Mexican state. So another Elguera. Let's get to this one. So here, even today, these are some recent photos. Here you have an Aztec warrior holding a school book and telling children, get an education, learn how to read and write, do the right things so that we can become powerful people. It's an image that you see again and again and again. It still resonates. And then finally, you have this Aztec warrior who is fighting against all kinds of forces. In this case, they've combined the conquest of Mexico with Superman. And I guess the idea is that he's winning. And this I just took last year, walking along streets north of Central Park in New York City. Aztlan is considered to be in Chicano culture to be the homeland of the Aztecs, but it's to the north of Mexico. So anything in North America is oftentimes referred to as Aztlan. So here he's the pride of Aztlan. Even though he's in New York, he has pride in his pre-Columbian heritage and the Mexican Revolution. Thank you.
Vasconcelos, who created the Secretariat of Public Education under Álvaro Obregón, and as we heard earlier, really went to great lengths to promote arts and education in Mexico as part of the revolutionary cause. Along those lines, in literature, we have three major currents going on in Mexico after the revolution in the 1920s and 30s, and one of them is the Contemporáneos. The Contemporáneos is a group of young men that first met when they were attending the National Preparatory School in 1918, and they formed what they called the Ateneo de la Juventud, or the Athenaeum of Youth. And they were trying to celebrate classical literature and classical art and antiquity. And Vasconcelos participated in this as well. Vasconcelos was a writer as well. He wrote an extensive, a three-part memoir of his own experiences of the Mexican Revolution. And part of which is called Ulises Criollo, so Ulysses, Creole Ulysses, where he's trying to, again, unite the classical Western tradition with the Hispanic and indigenous American tradition. The Contemporáneos then received substantial support from